Senator Ejercito is recognized to sponsor the measure.
Mr. President, esteemed colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, as the chairman of the Committee on Urban Planning, Housing and Resettlement, I stand this afternoon to sponsor Senate Bill number 3086 under Committee Report number 352 entitled An Act Creating the Department of Human Settlement and Urban Development, defining its mandates, powers, and functions, providing funds therefore and for other purposes. The Senate bill is in substitution of Senate Bill numbers 423, 1104, 2199, and 2691, authored by Senators Ferdinand Marcos Jr., Lauren Legarda, Jigoy Ejercito Estrada, and yours truly. Housing is a basic need of every individual, and the mandate of the Constitution is firm and clear as to the importance of housing and urban development. We are faced with a great challenge to provide decent and affordable shelter for the many that remain homeless in our country. In fact, the housing sector is facing a massive backlog, which is pegged at 5.6 million households by 2016, and it is expected to reach 12.4 million by 2030. With the population growing at an annual rate of 1.9% from 2000 to 2010, the continuing demand for affordable and adequate housing both in the urban and rural areas is projected to rise. However, it is daunting to know that despite the humongous task, the core legislation that creates a national policy-making body vested with the power to address and give high priority to the housing sector holistically is lacking. It is the opportune time that we take into consideration the creation of a single department that will focus solely on the management of housing and urban development, concentrating on access to and affordability of this very basic human need for shelter. So this proposed legislation, it is with great optimism that the escalating housing backlog and the institutional weakening of housing agencies will be effectively prioritized and resolved. The department shall be created through the consolidation of the Housing and Urban Development Coordinating Council, or the HUDC, and the Housing and Land Use Regulatory Board. The department shall act as the sole and main planning and policy-making, regulatory program coordination, and performance monitoring entity for all housing and urban development concerns. Under one housing department, we will then be able to better consolidate, rationalize, and coordinate the functions and powers of the HUDC and the HLURB, along with the other key shelter agencies, namely the National Home Mortgage Finance Corporation, the Home Guarantee Corporation, the Home Development Mutual Fund, the National Housing Authority, and the Social Housing Finance Corporation, which shall be attached to the department in order to facilitate faster response to the housing needs. The HLURB will be reconstituted and shall be known as the Human Settlements Adjudicatory Commission, and the adjudication function of the HLURB shall be assumed and exercised by the Commission. It is high time that we systematically address the housing need of this country and accept the challenge we now face to promote socially and environmentally sustainable human settlements and achieve adequate shelter for all. We need to realize the dreams of our people, the dream of every Filipino family. Just like food and nutrition and a safe environment, adequate shelter is a basic right of every Filipino, worthy of having its own department. The government must take it seriously, take matters in our own hands, and commit to this obligation. With the creation of the Department of Human Settlement and Urban Development, we will be more effective as a government in addressing the people's rights to adequate and safe housing. Having said this, Mr. President, my dear colleagues, I fervently push for the passage of Senate Bill number 3086, creating the Department of Human Settlement and Urban Development. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Senator Ejercito. Majority Leader.
Mr. President, in order to give our members time to study the measure, I move that we suspend consideration of Senate Bill 3086 under Committee Report 352.
Any objection? Hearing none, consideration of the measure is hereby suspended.
Mr. President, with the consent of the Senate, I move that we transfer Senate Joint Resolution 17 under Committee Report 354 from the calendar for ordinary business to the calendar for special orders.
Any objection? Hearing none, consideration of the measure is in order.
I move that we consider Senate Joint Resolution 17 under Committee Report 354.
Consideration of the measure is in order.
I move that the Secretary read only the title of the measure.
The Secretary will read the title of the measure.
Senate Joint Resolution Number 17, Joint Resolution ordaining a glossary of significant housing terminologies for the adherence by the key shelter agencies, other appropriate agencies of government, and other housing and urban development stakeholders.
Mr. President, I move that we once again recognize Senator Ejercito to sponsor the measure.
Senator Ejercito is recognized to sponsor the measure.
Mr. President, esteemed colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, I stand this afternoon as the chairman of the Committee on Urban Planning, Housing, and Resettlement to sponsor Senate Joint Resolution Number 17 under Committee Report Number 354, entitled Joint Resolution ordaining a glossary of significant housing terminologies for the adherence by the key shelter agencies, other appropriate agencies of government, and other housing and urban development stakeholders. The said Senate Joint Resolution is in substitution of Senate Joint Resolution Number 16. The Senate Joint Resolution endeavors to address the problem of lack of common terminologies in the housing and urban development sector because of the conflicting and inconsistent definitions. The various terminologies create confusion to government agencies, private sector, and other housing stakeholders. Moreover, this also accounts for the diverse and erroneous interpretation of housing data, as well as appreciation of housing problem, which results to incongruous housing planning and intervention by both the government and private sector. In this regard, the Committee on Urban Planning, Housing, and Resettlement of the Senate and the Committee on Housing and Urban Development of the House of Representatives distinguishes the need to formally ordain and publish a glossary of significant housing terminologies, standardize and systematize the respective definitions of the significant housing terms for the adherence by the key shelter agencies and other housing and urban development stakeholders. Mr. President, my dear colleagues, I ask for your support for the swift passage of Senate Joint Resolution Number 17. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Senator Ejercito. The chair is just curious. Is there a similar resolution in the House that was already acted upon by the lower house? This bill is a definition of terms.
Yes, Mr. President, I believe that this has been passed by the House.
Yes, thank you very much, Senator Harrison.
Mr. President, I move that we suspend consideration of Senate Joint Resolution 17 under Committee Report 354.
Before we suspend consideration of the measure, the chair notes that this is a very thick law. May I, and this is basically a definition of terms, may I request the sponsor to ask the staff to have a comparative tables of the definition of these various terms in the other laws and how it differs with those existing law, and what is the effect of such differences. Does it mean it has been amended? So that for easy reference, because this is a very thick measure, 95 pages, we have very limited time to assist the chamber in the careful consideration of this measure. May I reiterate the request of the chair that the staff prepares a matrix of the definitions, just comparable definitions in the other laws, and if there are differences.
Yes, Mr. President, we will submit forward to the offices of the different centers.
Thank you very much, Senator Harrison.
You reiterate our motion, Mr.
Motion to
President.
suspend. Any objection, hearing none, consideration of Senate Joint Resolution 17 under Committee Report 354 is hereby suspended.
Mr. President, with the consent of the Senate, I move that we resume consideration of Senate Bill 2947 under Committee Report 248. This bill pertains to the proposed Balanced Housing Development Program amendments, Mr. President.
All right. Any objection? Hearing none, in order.
The parliamentary status, Mr. President, is that the sponsor delivered his sponsorship speech last September 15, 2015. I move that we open the period of interpellations.
This is Senate Bill 2,
2947, the Balanced Housing
2947,
Development
yeah.
Program, Mr. President.
all right. Period of interpellation is in order.
I move that we recognize the sponsor, Senator J.V. Ejercito.
Senator Ejercito is recognized.
Mr. President, no members have signified their intent to interpellate. Given that that is the case, I move that we close the period of interpellations.
Any objection? Hearing none, the period for interpellation on Senate Bill 2947 and the Committee Report 248 is hereby terminated.
Mr. President, I move that we open the period of committee amendments.
Period for committee amendments is in order.
I move that we recognize Senator Ejercito for committee amendments.
The gentleman from San Juan, Senator Ejercito, principal sponsor of the measure, is recognized on the period of committee amendments.
Thank you, Mr. President. On page 2, line 13, under section 2, amendatory provisions, page, after the word requirement, we insert the sentence, for this purpose, the Housing and Urban Development Coordinating Council and the National Economic and Coordinating Authority shall jointly determine and set separate socialized housing price ceilings for the socialized subdivision and socialized condominium projects, which shall be reviewed or revised at any time, but not more than once every 2 years, to conform to prevailing economic conditions.
Any objection? Hearing none, approved.
Likewise, Mr. President, on page 2, line 23,
Please proceed.
I will delete the phrase "provided that" and insert the phrase, however, if it was shown that the commissioned developer grossly failed to perform its obligations, to read as follows. However, if it was shown that the commissioned developer grossly failed to perform its obligations, the owner and or developer of the main subdivision or condominium project shall be solidarily liable with the owner and or developer of the socialized housing project for the development of the latter, regardless of the provisions of their joint venture agreement.
Any objection? Hearing none, approved.
Likewise, under Section 2, amendatory provisions, page 3, lines 10 to 15 shall be rephrased to read as follows. Furthermore, as part of the requirements in the approval of the subdivision and condominium plans to be issued by any local government unit or government agency, the complying developer shall submit in writing the manner in which compliance with this section is proposed, subject to practical and reasonable changes or amendments.
Any objection? Hearing none, approved.
The last amendment, Mr. President, under Section 2, amendatory provisions, page 3, line 25, insert the following as subsection C. Section 20 of Republic Act Number 7279 is hereby amended to read as follows. Section 20, incentives for private sector participating in socialized housing. To encourage greater private sector participation in socialized housing and further reduce the cost of housing units for the benefit of the underprivileged and homeless, the following incentives shall be extended to private sectors. Letter A, reduction and simplification of qualification and accreditation requirements for participating private developers. Letter B, creation of one-stop offices in the different regions of the country for the processing, approval, issuance of clearances, permits, and licenses, provided that clearances, permits, and licenses shall be issued within 90 days from the date of submission of all requirements by the participating private developers. Letter C, simplification of financing procedures. And letter D, exemption from the payment of the following. Number 1, project-related income taxes, capital gains tax on raw lands used for the project. Number 3, value-added tax for the project contractor concerned. Number 4, transfer tax for both raw completed projects. Number 5, donors tax for land certified by the local government units to have been donated to the socialized housing purposes. provided that for purposes of application for tax exemption, only the portion allotted for socialized housing by private developers shall be entitled to the tax incentives under this Act. Provided further that upon application for exemption, a lien on the title of the land shall be annotated by the Register of Deeds. Provided finally that the socialized housing development plan has already been approved by the appropriate government agencies concerned. Provided finally that all the savings acquired by virtue of this provision shall accrue in favor of the beneficiary subject to the implementing guidelines to be issued by the Housing and Urban Development Coordinating Council.
Just a little minor amendment. Instead of the phrase savings acquired, can we replace it with savings realized?
Yes,
And then
Mr.
the last
President.
proviso, provided finally that all the savings realized by virtue of this provision shall accrue in favor of the beneficiaries, etc. Change the word acquired to realized.
Yes, Mr. President, accepted.
Any objection? Hearing none, approved.
Thereafter, Mr. President, thereafter renumber the previous subsection C as subsection D.
Uh,
That's all, Mr. President.